In the constantly changing world of fundability, the big question is this: how are entrepreneurs and real estate investors like us, ones who want to grow our businesses and who are tired of paying for really expensive alternative lending, how do we tap into the most inexpensive money available and do it without the hassle of typical borrowing? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. Welcome to the Get Fundable podcast with your host, Merrill Chandler.
Welcome back to the Get Fundable podcast. Merrill Chandler here, your host to the Get Fundable universe. And today we've got an amazing, I love what we're talking about today. We're going to be talking about the 4 levels of trust. Now, this impacts your relationship with banks, your personal relationships, your business partners, your children, everything. So when we come back, make sure that you do not miss this, because I'm going to tell you right now, you have no clue. When you say, I trust you, you have no clue what you're talking about. Come back and find out. So I just said something pretty damn arrogant, or you might even say that it was too bold for words. What do I mean when I say, if you tell somebody, I trust you, or somebody says, I trust you to you, I don't believe you know what you're talking about. You have no idea what you just said. And today we're going to explore it. So that when you say it after you listen to this podcast, when you say, I trust you, it's not going to be the end of the sentence. You're going to say, I trust you. And then you're going to fill in some more words, because trust is a really, really fuzzy thing for all of us. So let's take a look. What do we mean by trust? Trust is to have confidence in someone or something, right? I trust the sun's going to come out. Why? Because we're pretty damn confident the sun is not going to burn out between now and tomorrow morning, right? It's to trust something is to have confidence in them, to believe, truly believe that thing is real, that it's going to come to pass. But let's take a look at it and explore this a little bit more, right? When we say, I trust you, there are 4 levels at which that trust is actually manifest. The problem is since we don't all operate from this same framework, you may be saying, I trust you, honey, and they may be hearing, I trust you, and it be completely different. So let's take a look. 4 levels of trust. First level is the simplest, and we grow in broader and broader perspective. Here we go. So when we say I trust you, what 99.9% of us are saying is, I trust you to fulfill my unspoken expectations. No joke. That's what you're saying. Honey, I trust you to fulfill my expectations, the ones that I have not even communicated to you. And since you haven't communicated, it may look, based on that your partner or your sweetheart or your children, they may have a different framework or a different value set. Remember how we keep talking about values? And happiness is based on whether or not you're experiencing your values, right? But here's what's crazy. When you trust somebody with a different set of values than you have, the word trust means a completely different thing. All right, so what do I mean by that? Well, someone says, let's just play it bold. I trust you to be faithful to me. All right, let's just go for the hard ones. I trust you means you, the sayer, I trust you means that I trust you to treat every situation the way I would treat a situation. That's what you're actually saying. And if you're going to be honest with yourself, that's not good communication. So let's say that your sweetheart is a playful, gregarious, could even call them a flirty type of person. It doesn't mean anything to them. They're not out seeking or connecting. They're madly in love with you. But when you say, I trust you to be faithful, the way it looks to you is you're not a gregarious, playful person. You're not flirty. You're conservative, for the story's sake. So when you go into a party or a work event or whatever, you are the way you show up is based on your values, which is, I don't mix it up with people. I don't flirt. I'm not out in the world. I'm an introvert, but my sweetheart is an extrovert, and so they get a buzz off of talking with, playing with other people. So when you see them be their way, it looks like you said, I trust you to be faithful, but they're exhibiting what you believe is untrustworthy behavior. But it's untrustworthy behavior if you were to act that way, because that's who you are and that's your value set. You follow me? And how many arguments and pain and suffering do we go through, you guys? Because they're doing it differently than we do it, and so they're not being faithful. When, let's put the best positive spin on it, they're not, in their world, they're not being unfaithful. They're not looking, they're not flirting, they're just having a great time. But it looks hurtful and betrayal behavior to you. So when we say, I trust you, you're saying, I trust you to be like me in this situation. I trust you to handle a situation like I would handle it. But I haven't told you what my expectations are. I haven't told you how I would handle it. But we project it onto them and demand that they handle it like we handle it without a discussion. Now, besides not being fair, all this pain and suffering, you guys, all of this pain and suffering that we have is because you didn't communicate how you would handle situations or how you would act in that moment. And there's every situation can be this way, you guys. It isn't about faithfulness. It's about how you would handle disciplining an employee. And your business partner says, hey, we need to write them up. And you're like, why would we write them up? It's a common error. Well, I trust you to have my back and have the business's back, and that is not appropriate behavior. But you haven't talked about what is appropriate behavior. And so one person is like, you know what? It's a common coming in late. Yeah, we need to discipline them, but giving me a written warning to fire them, that's just a little much, don't you think? Let's give them another chance. Neither way is right or wrong. What's right or wrong is if you have agreed on the standard of behavior. And I trust you as my business partner to act as I would without telling you, without creating an employment policy about what tardiness and lates look like to the business and agreeing on it ahead of time. You following me here? So when you trust them, and most of us don't say, I trust you in the business, but that is how we operate in our mind. My partner isn't having the back, doesn't have the company's back, isn't taking care, isn't prioritizing the company. When the other partner is like looking at you going, why are you being so harsh? Let's give them another chance, because you haven't come to an agreement. Okay. So that leads us to our second level of trust. First level is I trust you to respond to this situation like I would respond. All right. And not tell you about it. Just expect you to do it. And so much anger and frustration, resentment, and heartache is in the world, you guys, as a result. Second layer of trust is kind of leads into what we were just saying. You agree on something, you give your word. So the second level of trust is I trust you at your word. So what does that mean? Well, let's go back to our partners in a business. When you say, here is the policy that we have for treating employees who are tardy. Well, that's like giving your word to behave in a certain way. So I'm trusting you to honor this policy, I'm trusting you to keep your agreement, because we fought hard, since we have such different perspectives. We fought hard to come to something we could both live with. Now I'm trusting you to keep your word. So somebody comes up a situation comes up who's tardy, then all of a sudden you have an agreement. But if now one of you breaks your word, that looks like not being untrustworthy behavior. It's a betrayal to the company. I trust you at your word. Okay. So let's go into, then the next level is I trust you to be who you are. Now, this is a next level up. Trust you at your word, but that's like putting, if you've got an alcoholic, and someone sets that alcoholic, or sets a beer in front of you or otherwise, and they swear they're not going to drink it, but who they are is someone who consumes alcoholic beverages, especially free ones that are put in front of them. Now I have to trust them to be who they are, even if they give me their word. Right? So now this starts getting now we have to actually look into the heart and soul of our business partners, our loved ones, our children, our parents. We have to look into the heart and soul and look for intention. And we're not here to judge their intention. We're here to create clarity in our own heart, because we're the ones who are miserable if we can't trust somebody. That's when we start looking. That's when we get hurt. So then notice, you're sitting there, you trust someone at their word, and they don't do it. You got to trust somebody to be who they are. I don't know. Let's go back to our employer example. The partner looks at him and says, yes, we agreed on this, but they're, forgive the language, but they're just a bleeding heart liberal. They're always going to give somebody a chance. They're always going to, so I got to trust them. I got to trust that the business, I love my partner, but they're always going to act a certain way when it comes to these types of things. I got to trust them to be who they are, even if they made me a promise. Now, I'm not saying we have to stay in business with these people. I'm not saying we have to stay in these relationships. I'm telling you how to navigate these crazy crazy, difficult situations where you get to stay in charge of your experience, where you get to take care of you. So once I've given somebody my word, but what I promised is not what I've promised is not who I am, then the next level of trust is to trust me to be the truth of me. And I may break my promise because that's who I am or where I am in my life. Now, the last one is the most liberating, the most freeing, and the most difficult. The last level of trust is to trust the journey. Some of you may believe, like I do, some of you may believe that there's a point and a purpose. There's something to learn in every moment. That some say there are no accidents. Yeah, if you've been in an accident, you don't want to believe that one, but what if it's true, right? What if things happen for a reason? Now, I don't want to get all philosophical on it, but I don't believe there's a better way to treat life. Ultimately, it doesn't matter to me if it's true. There is no accident, or there's a point and purpose to everything. But I don't believe there's a better way to live my life unless I believe that. So does that make sense? It doesn't matter. What if the universe is just a cold, hard, empty place and this is all bullshit? My life becomes really meaningless really fast. So I prefer to say that there is a point and a purpose, even if I don't know exactly what it is. And if there's a point and a purpose, then what if I just trust life? What if I trust it? That I trust life more than I trust somebody to fulfill my expectations, unspoken expectations. What if I trust life more than I trust somebody at their word? What if I trust life more than trusting someone to be the truth of who they are? What if I trust the journey? What if I trust the path that I'm walking? What if I believe, just for an experiment, what if I believe that there is something meaningful from everything that I'm experiencing? I love living my life that way, and I invite you to explore it if you're not already living that way. So this is all great in theory, but how do we translate this? Well, I would love to share with you my experience with my son. It's very difficult for me to talk about it because I learned these levels of trust from the brutal, heartbreaking experience I've had with my son. My son, for almost 2 decades now, has been battling for his soul against a heroin and drug addiction. It has been brutal on him, brutal on the family, because so first level, I look at him as he's shared it with me. We send him to rehab, and I trusted him to fulfill my unspoken expectations. All right, you go to rehab, you follow the plan, you do the thing, and you become healthy. You become sober. So what am I doing? I had the gall, the audacity to put on him my way in the world. I'm the checklist guy. Okay, what's next? How do I become sober? Check. So when I say, no, son, he came out of rehab, and I'm sitting there face to face with him, and I love this boy with all my heart, right? And he's a teenager at this point, and I say, I trust you, son. I trust you I trust you. And what I didn't say and what I wasn't aware of until later is I was saying, I trust you not to hurt me anymore. I wasn't stepping into his shoes. I didn't know what his world was about. I didn't know how he felt about what was going on. He wanted to fulfill my expectations. He wanted to do right by me. He knew I loved him, and I know with all of his heart he loves me. But love is not as powerful as we wish it were in many things in our life. And I trust you. You got this, son. Playing cheerleader. But what I was really telling him is that I trust you to fulfill my expectations, to not hurt me. Months pass, years pass. I rehab 1, rehab 2, opportunity 1, opportunity 2. And again, I don't share this that he failed. He's never failed his journey. More on that in a moment. But I believe he failed me because I wasn't stepping into his shoes. I wasn't walking with him. I was calling him up to the place on the trail where I was when he wasn't ready to travel that particular path yet. And so he began. So I promised, Dad, I promise I'll not use again. So I'm like, just keep your word. I trust you to keep your word. But that's like putting a 20-pound pack on a 3-year-old child. He just didn't yet have the capacity to carry that, especially by himself, which of course I left him there to carry it on his own because I trusted him at his word. You made the promise. Let's do it together. Cheerleader, cheerleader, cheerleader. And then the demons that he's carrying are too heavy. So then my safety zone was to be like, well, I can't trust him at his word, so I'll trust him to be who he is. But I still had expectations of who he was. I was either in denial or deluded, but because I did not, now this one's kind of embarrassing. So there was a time when I wanted to relate to him. I wanted to relate to what he was doing. So what did I do? I put on some grubby old clothes and put on some and ruffled up my hair and got a little grungy. And I went out and spent 3 days living on the streets, trying to step into his shoes. And while that was miserable, kind of bundled up in a blanket, but sleeping on cardboard, the arrogance that I had, because I knew that after 2 or 3 days, whenever I chose out, that I'd go take a shower, I'd go back to my life and everything was hunky-dory, but I would know what it felt like to be my son who was addicted to heroin. No bueno, guys. That was not cool because I unknowingly, because my heart is huge for him, but unknowingly, I used it against him because I could say, I know what it feels like to be out in the cold, sleeping on cardboard. And yet I still hadn't climbed into his experience. So when I said I trusted him to be who he was, I now labeled him, and that made it a safe place in my heart. I could shield myself from the pain of my only son battling for his soul. And it was and so I steeled my heart against him and his experience to protect myself. Now, those of you who've been through this, I'm fucking certainly not alone. Those of you who have had these types of experiences, you know, you're trying to do it right. You're trying to show up for them. And sometimes there is just no showing up. And that's when I learned the fourth level of trust. And I had it beat into me, is that I have to trust that life and the divine energy, the divine soul that amazing boy is, now a full-grown man, that there is a point to all of this. Now, do I know that in the objective world? I've got no clue. But it doesn't serve me or him for me to believe that it's meaningless. And so the fourth level of trust, I learned this by trusting his journey, trusting his life, that I do what I can, where I can, but he is in this space for a point and a purpose. And so when he asks me for money, I try to, what is it for? When he needs something from me, I do the very best that I can so that I don't enable and at the same time isolate him and abandon him. This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, and it is 2% of what he is facing and what all of our loved ones and our family members and the people we care about who face similar challenges. So I learned the very, very, very hard way about what it means to trust. And I was taken off of my arrogant, I had to abandon my thoughts and ideas of addiction, thoughts and ideas of what it is to love someone, what it is to be loved back by someone. This has pulled the rug out of everything in my life. Now, I'm still that guy. I'm still me. I'm still Merrill. So what do? I optimize everything, right? That's just who I am. We got this big Get Fundable podcast on the back wall, but it doesn't mean that I stop being who I am when I'm talking about my son. I optimize everything. And so this is a peek. Today's podcast is a peek into creating a gentle and compassionate and clear and loving relationship with the people in your life by you knowing what you mean by trust. So if you are disappointed by somebody's behavior and you haven't, and you're still at level 1 of trust, where you're expecting him to fulfill your unspoken expectations and act like you in a situation without telling what it means to you, That's on you. You get to suffer. I certainly did. I suffered like a madman until I learned this. And hopefully you get to cheat and learn this the easy way. But nonetheless, I learned that there's, when I agree on something, agree on a standard of behavior, what does it mean to keep one's word? And I do everything in my power to be a man of integrity and keep my word or not make a promise. But at least I know that if I know that someone is going to not keep their word, that I don't hold them to it. If it's not where they are on their journey, you guys, you cannot hold them to their word. If you know, you don't get to guilt them. You don't get to shame them, which is all the things that I did with my son. You don't get to use trust and broken trust as a weapon to cover your own pain and suffering in this relationship, like I did. Once if you trust them to be who they are, then there is a gentleness and a sense of calm that came over me anyway, where I could say, this is my son today, not who he was or who he will be. This is my son today. And I trust him to keep walking his path. And I trust him that he will treat certain things. On Christmas, I have a habit of, I always, it's funny, empathetic, but I give my children money at Christmas, usually in the form of $100 bills, so that they can take advantage of all the sales after Christmas or get the things that they want or save it or do whatever their value set is, right? And my son at this point asked me to hold his Christmas money, and then we have a discussion whenever he wants some of it to use, because he's taken it all and blown it on things that didn't support what he said were his goals for his life. But that only came after years and years of guilting and shaming and bullshit that I just loaded on him because I was trying to protect from feeling pain. And you guys know, I know those of you who are listening, you know how much it hurts to not know how to love somebody. You know how much it hurts to not know how to love somebody. And so finally, every one of us, I guarantee you, whether you've learned it yet or you'll learn it the day before you die, but every one of us will learn to trust the process. Trust the process. Trust the journey. Trust that there is a point to all of it. This is Merrill Chandler, your host of what feels really lame right now, the Get Fundable podcast. And I encourage you to love and trust and take care of your loved ones in every way you possibly can. Be well.
Thank you for listening to the Get Fundable podcast. Please leave comments because Merrill would love to read about your aha moments from this episode. And be sure to visit getfundable.com to read our blog, get important links, join our community, and much, much more, like ordering Merrill's tell-all book that is changing the world, The New F Word. And you got to tell your friends about this podcast because we want them to get fundable too.